You remember when like there was a big eclipse, not last year, but a while ago,
Hmm.
and like Trump looked at the eclipse and like everyone online made fun of him
Uh-huh.
for it because he looked right at the eclipse.
Yeah.
I mean, that was
Yeah.
funny, but can we can we admit that like we've all kind of done
Yeah.
that? Look, here's this is confession time. When the eclipse came through Dallas last year, I
Sure.
totally looked at it
Well, the other thing, I mean,
and my eyes hurt for like 2 days, and I didn't tell anyone because I was embarrassed.
even at the time, I was like, okay, but everybody, when you're just like going about your day, every once in a while, you accidentally glance at the sun sometimes,
Yeah.
and it doesn't damage your eyes. It's not that dangerous.
Well, but the thing about the eclipse is like you don't think it's hurting your eyes because it's like mostly
Uh-huh.
gone, and then the trick is no, actually, it is really hurting your eyes because you're staring at it for a long amount of time. Look, what I'm saying is like for two
Yeah.
2 days at least afterwards, my eyes hurt like all the time, and I was like, oh no, what have
You've
I
blinded
done?
yourself.
Yeah, and now I can't decide whether things are blurrier now because I looked at the eclipse or just because I'm getting old.
It's probably just because you're getting old.
No, I think it's the eclipse. Hello and welcome to Flanagan's Wake, a Doof Media podcast watching, analyzing, and discussing the collective works of Mike Flanagan. My name is Scott Daly, and I am your host. And joining me, as always, he's only made of moonlight. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Spooky.
You just
Staring at you from the corner.
walking any strange corners lately?
Oh, just the corner of your bedroom in the middle of the night.
Oh, great. I can't wait to definitely see that when I go to bed tonight. Thank you.
Uh-huh,
Appreciate
uh-huh,
that.
uh-huh. Don't worry, don't worry. I'll be silent. I won't disturb you at all.
Oh, good. That makes it less creepy. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
This week on the show, we continue our time with Stephen King's Gerald's Game as we work up to Flanagan's adaptation of that novel. This week, we're reading chapters 9 through 13 of King's novel. Jessie remains handcuffed to the bed as she manages, after quite a difficult time, to get a drink of water, and also begins her journey into the past that all culminates at Dark Score Lake. Also, the Moonlight Man arrives. He's there in the room. Hooray.
What a shift.
Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Oh, I really love this. We talked a lot last week as we started to get into this book about just what an unusual book it is in terms of what it's doing narratively
Yeah.
and how it is written. And I think, if anything, I came to appreciate the genius behind it more this week, where I think there'll be a specific part when I bring this up again, but basically that there is a very solid structure behind this book that at times feels very chaotic.
Yeah.
I'll wait a minute and then we'll kind of get back into that once we have an example of what I'm talking about.
Sure.
But that was my main kind of impression, was understanding and appreciating how sort of structured and thought out this actually is, but in a very subtle way.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite things in storytelling and filmmaking and writing and all this stuff is when something looks effortless and easy, but is like sneakily, like ridiculously complicated under the surface. Like we talked about this with Flanagan's Hush, right? Is a film that just seems on the surface, this would probably be pretty easy to do. 2 characters, 1 location, simple. But the reality of that movie was it was actually extraordinarily difficult to accomplish everything they wanted to do there. And I think you're right. The same is true here. That this is like, just stream of consciousness. You don't even have to write many characters. And I think there's a lot of stuff going on just under the hood of this thing to make it work as well as it's working. Because I'm with you on this. It's been a while since I read this book, and I am kind of surprised how well it's working on me this time around. Like I figured there's no tension, there's no surprise anymore. I know how everything kind of pans out in this thing, but man, it's some really effective writing. It really is.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get right into it. We begin with chapter 9. We begin this chapter with Jessie still reeling from Prince's Gerald snack that just ended last week's final chapter. And then Jessie, calming herself from that, realizes that, man, she's pretty thirsty. And actually solving this problem will be like the driving force of the actual plot of the first half of this week's reading. But before we get there, we do have, I just wanted to point out some just incredible, just prose from Stephen King here. Just some really good stuff that it's a little long, but I'm going to read it just so we can all appreciate it together. Here we go. Golden light, it was almost sunlight now, dazzled her, and she shut her eyes again, watching the ebb and flow of red and black as her heart pushed membranes of blood through her closed lids. After a few moments of this, she noticed that the same darting patterns repeated themselves over and over again. It was almost like looking at protozoa under a microscope, protozoa on a slide which had been tinted with a red stain. She found this repeating pattern both interesting and soothing. She supposed you didn't have to be a genius to understand the appeal of such simple repeating shapes, held given the circumstances. When all normal patterns and routines of a person's life fell apart, and with such shocking suddenness, you had to find something you could hold on to, something that was both sane and predictable. If the organized swirl of blood in the thin sheaths of skin between your eyeballs and the last sunlight of an October day was all you could find, then you took it and said thank you very much. Because if you couldn't find something to hold on to, something that made at least some sort of sense, the alien elements of the New World Order were apt to drive you quite mad. I just like brilliantly written. Like, I mean, what is happening here is Jessie standing there closing her eyes and looking at her eyelids through the sunlight, right? And yet we construct this beautiful metaphor of protozoa, of routine and pattern and sense out of the senseless that
Yeah.
I just love so much.
Right. It becomes this profound statement about order and chaos and patterns. So what I love about it is, yeah, it's taking this mundane thing that would absolutely happen to you in this circumstance where you're handcuffed to the bed. Fundamentally, among other things, you're starting to get bored. Like it's funny to think about, but like you can't be in terror for that long consecutively. So at a certain point, Jesse's just like, okay, she's just overwhelmed. She's closing her eyes. Her mind is just wandering, right? Her
Yeah.
mind is wandering. She's just looking at the blood flowing through her eyelids. It's a very mundane thing that would happen. And then King connects it to the theme of structure and what lies underneath the structure of your world, or the fact that maybe you are using structure and order and pattern as a way of pushing away the darkness and the chaos. Literally, what she's doing here, she's finding comfort in the pattern of the blood pulsing in her eyes, and she's equating that to the pattern of structure in a person's life.
Hmm.
And if that structure falls apart, then they scramble for some other structure, even if it's something very superficial, like just a literal visual temporal pattern. And what we begin to learn about Jessie, I think last weekend, this week, is she has taken refuge in pattern. She has taken refuge in structure and repetition and these identities, like the good wife identity,
Hmm.
where these are sort of reinforced by pattern, by repetition, and this all like it all magnificently ties together with what we're doing with this book at the grandest scale, and it's just this minor moment of her being distracted by the sight of her, and also it's blood, right? The fact that it's
Yeah.
blood is kind of just like metal, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you pointed that out because that is definitely one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this segment in particular, because this is absolutely connecting to everything we're doing so far. I love what you said about the hiding and the pattern and the structure. I think that's something we definitely in this week's reading see more in Jessie, and how she's kind of made it to this point in her life without ever really having to deal with what happened to her. Is exactly that. She's hidden, she's ran, and hiding and pattern and both running are two things that in her situation have been taken away from her now. She can't run. She's tied to a bedpost, handcuffed to a bedpost, and the patterns and sense and rational world is crashing around her. You know, we see this with the man's best friend now eating man has been a complete turn of events there. Now suddenly, you know, at the end of the chapter, there's going to be a man suddenly in the room, a silent man that who himself is not following the pattern or structure. He's odd looking, things aren't lining up right, and she's unable to hide in this pattern anymore. She's desperately grabbing for it and grasping for it as a way to make it through, but she's not able to, and so she's eventually going to be forced to confront everything, right?
Yep. There's one more motif I just want to point out here because it's, I think, very nice that this is the chunk of book that we're picking out, because this chunk begins with sunlight and it ends with moonlight.
Hmm.
And so light is a, I guess motif is the word here. And just I'm just flagging it so that we can pay attention to how the story uses light, because I imagine it's going to be a consistent element.
Yeah, I mean, definitely we have the eclipse and the event at Darkscore Lake happening during the eclipse
Mhm,
and
mhm.
making the sun go out, right? And this idea of an event that makes the sun go away, and you know, obviously not moonlight, but we do have we have darkness, and then we have absence of sunlight. You know, it's just it
Yeah.
all these different motifs are definitely in play. Yeah, for sure.
So, didn't make this connection before, but like the idea of an eclipse is itself a kind of totally chaotic, maddening thing, right? Like if
Yeah,
you didn't know about eclipses, like that, this is why eclipses were the center of like ancient religion. Is it's like, and then the moon is, you know, the sun is swallowed by the moon, you know, we have to appease the gods. This is a terrifying, terrifying violation of the natural order, is what it is.
yeah,
And the fact that this terrible event happened to her during an eclipse, it connects with all these ideas of order and chaos, and the the false sense of security and safety that comes with order and routine.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it being dark during the day is as unnatural as a dog eating a man, or a father abusing a daughter, right? That like
hmm,
we've talked before about how that's a fundamental betrayal of everything that's supposed to work, right? You know, as a parent, you're supposed to protect your kids, not harm your kids, and that is so. Yeah, like the sun going away in the middle of the day, that is a fundamental uh upending of how the way everything in the world is supposed to work. Yeah.
yep,
I also really love this part, Matt, that we're about to get to here, because I want to just circle back around to our conversation last week about the book kind of going out of its way to not try to paint Gerald as just a monster, because we get this: the sounds that were a filthy star. The sounds that were a filthy, starving stray eating part of the man who had taken you to see your first Bergman film, the man who had taken you to the amusement park at the old beach, coaxed you aboard the big Viking ship that swung back and forth like in the air like a pendulum, then laughed until tears squirted out of his eyes when you said that you wanted to go again. The man who had once made love to you in the bathtub until you were literally screaming with pleasure. The man who was now sliding down that dog's gullet in gobs and chunks. So, just once again, we're going out of our way to show that there was a side of Gerald that she did love, right?
yeah, yeah. I think so. It's poignant, and it's sad, right? I think it's fully 3 dimensional, right? It's just she definitely, the way Gerald died was terribly traumatic for her, and so it's understandable that she would have felt not a lot of empathy for him in that exact moment, just maybe horror, but not love.
Yeah.
But as the event, as the kind of meaning of it sneaks up on her, I think that we're seeing more of these snatches of what we would normally associate with typical grief.
Yeah. And I want to be very clear here. I don't think the intent here is for the book to be telling you, "Oh, Gerald, not such a bad guy after all." No, I
Yeah,
don't think that's the intent. The intent for me is that this kind of behavior, this kind of betrayal that Gerald showed in his what turns out to be the final minutes of his life, are things that can come from anyone, anywhere, ever.
yeah,
Jesse's father, like a loving, kind, passionate man who was a good father. This thing can come from anywhere, and that is the most insidious part of it. Is that like like this kind of behavior, this kind of person is hiding in just people,
Yeah.
just everyday people.
Yeah, I mean, while we're kind of going heavy on the talk about motifs and themes and so forth, I really think there's kind of a theme and imagery around duality. We just talked about the sun and the moon,
Hmm.
which is a kind of duality. And within Jessie herself, we have the good wife and Ruth, which is a kind of duality within Jessie's soul. Uh, we have the dog, which is simultaneously man's best friend and a carnivore who, when push comes to shove, will eat you.
Hmm.
And finally, I think the duality of man, to use the cliche in its full form, is that like a man is both like a Labrador Retriever, like who is just wants to be loved and like play, and also potentially a murderer if you put him in
Hmm.
the wrong situation,
Yep.
or worse than a murderer, just like a selfish piece of shit. Like so so that's the duality. And again, I don't, like you just said, we're not saying, oh, actually Gerald was fine. It's like actually Gerald has this duality, just like kind of everything in the cosmology of this story seems to have a duality to it.
Yeah,
um
man, I never really thought of the dog with this kind of idea in mind in my past reads of this book, but I think it is kind of remarkable how much the dog, like of course we'll see in the dream later that Gerald becomes the dog who becomes her father, and so obviously King is trying really hard in his imagery to link the dog and what is the dog is doing and what is happening with the dog in this book to everything else that's happening. But for whatever reason, my brain never really made the connection until this read, how linked in that is with everything. Because I think you're so right. This idea of a dog being, the kindest, most wonderful companion you could possibly have ever. Like, I love
mhm.
dogs. I absolutely love dogs, and
Yeah,
Stephen King loved dogs. But yeah, also, they can be violent animals
yeah,
because they are animals, right?
yeah. They're I mean, if you just objectively look at a dog, they're a monster. Just one more remark on this bit you read to us, where we're kind of so far in this chapter we've sort of been following what maybe on the surface appears to be a meandering stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
But actually, this is what I meant about the subtle and complex structure that underlies this in the writing, where there is a progression that is laid out over the course of these chapters. There's a sequence. There's one thing leading to another. There's a sequence of ideas that are connected, but they're below the surface, and they're connections that in many cases Jessie herself is only vaguely aware of, or maybe even trying to not be aware of. But like I think the the author tips his hand to the reader on purpose in a few places so we can follow it. And it's just, that's what I mean about it being genius, is we've thrown out the rule book of how you do storytelling and narrative and even character to a large degree, but he has like then snuck it all back in, but he's kind of presenting it in these really subtle ways through the logical associations that Jessie is making, or the decisions she's making, or the decisions she's postponing. And I'm saying that now. I'm hanging it on this particular observation, where once again it's like we're following what seems to be a stream of consciousness, but there's an order to it, and as we go, we'll kind of see that play itself out and kind of unspool itself.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great observation. I completely agree. Like, it'd be very simple to just look at this as just every event that happens to her, every moment when her brain, via either the good wife or Ruth, like assaults her with a particular memory or a particular idea or something. It would be very easy to just say these are just random things that are firing because she's in this situation. But you're absolutely right. There is underneath all this a very clear, if hidden, like kind of causality going
Mhm.
on here. That we are linking a cause and effect chain as we go through all this stuff.
Exactly.
100%.
Yep.
So Jesse's inner voices continue to push and prod her, claiming that she's been asleep her whole life. And then, as she imagines a group of women standing around pointing and laughing at a young girl, which, by the way, is an image we'll return to soon, we get this moment here. She started when she was only 10 and a half, talking about her period. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe he smelled blood, just like the dog out in the entry. Maybe it made him look frantic. There's, by the way, another link between the dog's behavior and her father's behavior. And this is so. I just wanted to put this out here now because this is something that throughout the course of these chapters this week, the book is going to basically just come completely out and tell us this. But the basically we now know the event that occurred out at Dark Score Lake when Jessie was a little girl was being molested, sexually abused by her father, right? We don't know the details of it yet, but I don't actually think that matters at this point in the novel. We know enough to draw a picture of what happened for us. And I think this is actually important that it's done this early in the book, that only about 100 pages in, because this is not a book about like a shocking twist reveal of what happened to Jessie when she was a little girl. Like that's not what the book is about. It's not us getting this shocking reveal. We kind of understand very, very quickly. And you and I talk, like we played a little coy last week, but there's gestures towards this that a new reader could possibly have picked up on this as early as halfway through last week's reading, right? This is just 50 pages into the book.
Yeah.
So the book is not about us figuring out what happened. The book is about Jessie allowing herself to look at and process what happened for the first time in her life. And like it is interesting how King, like, once he kind of lets us know on that, like we are in almost a situation of dramatic irony with Jessie, where we've kind of figured it all out. Like there's this recurring beat about this lake mineral smell of salt and old pennies that she finds very, very disturbing. And like, okay, we kind of know what that means, Matt. Like
Yeah.
you want everyone reading this book kind of knows what that smell is and what it means. It's not just the lake, but Jessie hasn't realized that yet. So it's not about us realizing anything. It's about her realizing it.
Yes, yes, and like you said, processing it, because
Yeah.
I think part of the reason why it's effective is that it's not the text is pretty clear that it's not sort of the Hollywood version of repressed memory,
Mm.
where my understanding is that the quote unquote repressed memory that we see in fiction very often is sort of a fiction. It's not that it never happens, but it's, I think, relatively rare that you will just like have a memory that's totally dissociated. I think it's much, much more common that you'll have a memory that you try not to think about or try to think your way around, which is just what Jessie is doing here, where it's not really that she doesn't remember what happened on the lake. It's more that she has tried very hard not to remember what happened on the lake. She's tried not to know. She's tried not to think about it. She's built up a lot of grooves in her brain to facilitate thinking her way around it so
Hmm.
that she doesn't have to confront it. And this is infinitely more relatable because I suspect we all have stuff we avoid thinking about to greater or lesser degrees. We may not all have like a repressed trauma, quote unquote, which is again, don't want to say that never happens because I don't think that's true that it never happens. But this is just more relatable. It's just like, oh yeah, well, I can connect with this character. This is a real. This feels real. This you can probably think of something in your life that is similar to what Jesse's experiencing here, which makes it way more resonant, I think, for the typical reader.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have moments of like embarrassment or shame or hurt that. Yeah, I mean, like, could I honestly say that I don't remember those things? But no, but yeah, I try like hell to not think about them. And there are moments where you like you start to see your brain's connection path start to fire, and you just go, whoop, nope,
Yeah,
let's turn away from that. I think you're right, and I think that is essentially what's going on here, because she does like as we'll see throughout this chapter, or these chapters rather, like it's not that she's never thought about Darkscore Lake in her life before. There are many separate moments in which she's had an experience that has brought her back to that feeling. I mean, the being goosed by her brother 2 years after the event is one of them. The thing we'll see with Ruth is another one of them. It's not like she hasn't been reminded of these things. She's just every time that's happened, just been like, whoop, nope, nope, going over
Yep.
here, not doing that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I think you're just right here.
Yeah, I mean, one metaphorically, it's like over the course of all of the book up until up until the end of this week's reading, it's like she's been taking these large circles around this thing, and the circles get smaller and smaller,
Yeah,
and maybe they touch on it and they bounce off and touch on it and bounce off, but it's like she no matter where she goes, she keeps being drawn back into it, and until she's think by the end of this week's reading, she's thinking directly about it in a way that she absolutely was not toward the beginning of the book.
yeah.
It was highly oblique before.
I think that's great because it also kind of ties into what I think the book is doing with smell. Like, we just talked about this sense of mineral and old pennies, and we've talked last week about how she really couldn't stand Gerald's smell. Smell is like really closely tied with memory, right? This is why, I think I talked last week about like this the smell of your spouse is just something that makes you feel home, because it's like it's so very closely tied with these things. And so this idea of smell being a way to like a thing can get around her blocks or her dodges, I think is really powerful. And that's why she didn't want to go to the lake anymore. That's why like she hated Gerald's smell. Like it's really interesting the way this all kind of connecting together.
Yeah, it's not that I hate Gerald and I'm sick of him. It's that he just smells bad. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So Matt, we didn't even mention Nora, the old therapist that taught Jessie the counting technique last week. I mean, we talked about the counting technique, but we didn't really focus on Nora because last week Jessie just kind of said like, "Oh yeah, I had a therapist once, and she taught me this technique, and then you know I just stopped seeing her. I don't really remember why. I think I just got like busy with life, and no, that was another one of her methods of not necessarily repressing what happened, not misremembering what happened with Nora, but that got too close to the truth, and therefore we've just kind of dodged around the truth of what happened there, which is that Nora started prying, started asking questions that Jessie didn't like, and so she decided to say goodbye to her. Um, and we learn also that a similar thing happened with Ruth, right?
yeah, yeah. Exactly. I mean, we get really into the details of that later, and that's really really sad. I think one of the saddest parts of the book is coming to understand how Jessie is only now for the first time in middle age confronting this pattern of behavior where she kind of has no friends. And it's because she has systematically pushed away everyone who has gotten close enough to
Yeah.
start asking questions about her. Uh, I don't, basically beyond anything that touches upon this secret that she has.
Yeah. It's really great because, last week we talked about Ruth, and I think I said something to the effect of like, this is the type of person like you meet in college, you're kind of enraptured by, but you kind of naturally grow out of them. And I think what we were responding to there, I'm not prepared to say like we read this situation wrong, because obviously Jessie didn't grow out of Ruth. I'm not saying that that's like we were wrong in this and I said the wrong thing. What actually I think happened very intentionally was Jesse's characterization of Ruth, the person that Ruth was that we learned from those chapters, was a unfavorable one that made her seem like less of a really really close friend, less of a really really important person in her life, more of a flighty, like kind of crazed, opinionated, going to do everything person, because she didn't want to admit to herself how close they were, how important this person was to her, that this person loved her and that she loved her. Like this was probably one of her strongest friendships in her life. That's not something she was willing to admit last week. So that's not the way she characterized her at all.
Yeah, that's a great point. She seemed to have no trouble dismissing Ruth as, like you said, this flighty girl she used to know, and now you
Mhm.
realize like this may have been, the last real chance you had to confront this thing that you are now forced to confront.
Yeah.
Was Ruth trying to talk to you about this, and
Yeah.
you can hardly blame Ruth being, basically like 18 or 19,
Yeah.
not having all of the tools at her disposal to like have that conversation in the most delicate way possible.
Yeah.
Um, and thus things played out this way.
Yeah. And I love that, like, looking back on the first couple chapters when Ruth first appears as a voice in her head, Jesse's kind of like taken aback and surprised. It was like, this person that I haven't spoken to in years or even thought about, this person. And like, now that we know the full extent of their friendship and everything, it's like, yes, of course it's this person.
Yeah.
This is the person that's gotten closest to you, even probably closer than your own husband, actually.
I mean, maybe this is some level of projection, but I would guess that part of Jesse, much like part of Jesse has been trapped in that eclipse, part of Jesse has sort of been trapped in like mourning over this loss of her dear friend Ruth,
Yeah.
and wishing she could go back and not have made that decision, or
Yeah.
maybe even wishing she could reach out to her, at even now, but sort of knowing in advance, like, well, I can't do that because then we would have to talk about the thing, and
Yeah.
I'm still not ready to talk about the thing. So,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similar patterns here in Jesse's life of giving up the things she wants for the sake of the men in her life, right? Like
mhm,
she gives up her friendship with Ruth because of her father. She gives up, as we'll see later, teaching because Gerald wants her to. Like these incredibly important things and people in her life, she's like systematically throwing them away for the sake of the men in her life, and that's kind of destroying her.
mhm,
On top of the trauma of it's like, I think that's what's one of the really interesting things about this book is that, like, it's not everything in Jesse's life has been defined by what happened at Darkscore Lake. Of course it did. Of course it would. But like, the book is not just about Jesse realizing and confronting what happened at the lake with her father. It's about her confronting and realizing every moment in her life after that she's made a choice or felt like she had to do a thing, that has taken her to this path that leads her to this moment, to right now, to chained to a bed. Like, it is about all of it, everything. It's
right,
not just let's talk about this event. It's like, let's deal with all of it. Let's deal with everything, because it
yeah,
is all this chain, that led to these chains.
yeah. I I think it's really interesting that King chose to have it be the case that her father is dead and has been dead for years.
Mhm.
Because you can imagine sort of a version of this story where she has to grapple with this because she needs to have that confrontation.
Yeah,
And it's like, no, he's dead. There's no confrontation.
yeah,
The
yeah,
confrontation is you, like, there can, like, there's no consequences left from the outside world. The consequence is that you have barricaded yourself into the fortress,
yeah.
and you need to figure out how to get out of that.
Yep, yep. I think that's absolutely intentional. I think you're right. Like, he did not want to signal that any kind of confrontation or, like, anything could happen in the book,
Mhm.
because it's not about that. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So from here we move into a flashback. We flash back to Jesse's time in college with Ruth, which the text describes. I love this as, for the most part, quite wonderful. A time when fearlessness seemed usual and achievement inevitable. Like, that's like just a great way of summarizing youth, right?
Yeah. I agree. I love that phrasing.
Yeah. So basically, what happens, Matt, is that Jesse is asked by Ruth to attend a woman's consciousness group. I love this. Like, there's nothing textual in here that says this, because it's been established that Ruth just like attends every group, every game. Like, her college experience is going to and doing everything.
Mhm.
But there's a part of me that wants to read into this that Ruth, after hanging out with Jesse, like, detected there was something in her past and brings her to this group specifically, like, surreptitiously to, like, maybe help her confront that a little bit.
Hmm.
There, again, nothing in the text that says that, but that's just kind of a headcanon of mine.
Cool. I like that idea. I can't say that I had the same thought, but I
Mhm.
enjoy that thought. Yeah.
Yeah. So here is how the book describes this moment. In there, Jessie had discovered a ghastly gray world which seemed simultaneously to preview the adult future that lay ahead for her in the 80s, and to whisper of gloomy childhood secrets that had been buried alive in the 60s, but did not lie quiet there. I love that. Like we get this image of this youthful Jessie who has kind of successfully managed, or in her mind perhaps successfully managed, to dodge dealing with this thing that happened to her. She's living this carefree world where fearlessness seemed usual and achievement inevitable. And then she walks into a room and is confronted with a bunch of women that all went through the same thing that she went to, or similar things, right? This is a group filled with stories of people talking about rape, of incest, of physical torture. There's a young girl whose breasts were burned by a cigarette from her brother. And like she's also, I think, being molested by her father. Like just like the worst possible things you could imagine a person having to go through. And this is a bunch of women showing to Jessie that, hey, like this wasn't just like a thing that happened to you. This is a thing that happens often. And this is a part of life that a lot of people unfortunately have to deal with. And the truth of that is overwhelming. A ghastly gray world. It's like the color is drained from the world.
Mhm.
It's very very well described, but very upsetting.
It's very upsetting. It feels incredibly raw and real. All of the vignettes of the other women and their terrible stories and the effect this has on Jesse. I also think just that bit you read a second ago is a fantastic view into her kind of worldview or maybe stance toward the world. Is like, yeah, basically my childhood was full of horrible secrets that made me miserable, and my adulthood has been essentially a slog of tolerating just low grade mistreatment at all times.
Hmm.
And I had this like brief reprieve in college that lasted for a tiny sliver of time, and that's what existence is.
Hmm.
That's it. That's all we're destined for. It's extremely depressing, and nonetheless feels like, yeah, this feels like a credible way that a person would come to see the world if they had the experiences that Jesse has had.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So Jessie runs away. She runs as far into the kitchen, but finds herself behind a locked door, trapped. And Ruth confronts her there. I love this sentence here. What mattered was the sun had gone out, the very sun itself. And if she told, her story would be disbelieved only if God was good. If God was in a bad mood, Jessie would be believed. And even if it didn't kill her mother, it would blow the family apart like a stick of dynamite in a rotten pumpkin. I love this. We talk about people talk about so much when people are abused, when these terrible things happen. It's like, well, why didn't you report it? Why didn't you talk about it? Why didn't you do that? And what I think people don't understand that haven't gone through it, that I think this book does a very good job channeling, is the shame, is the guilt, and is the feeling like you have this thing that will destroy everyone's world, and the pressure of that. And we will learn later in this week's reading that this idea of this was installed by her father, right? Like
Mhm.
there's a little note there. It was like he said if we told, this would happen. Um, and so like this is something that was instructed upon her as well, of
Yeah.
this idea that I couldn't possibly ever tell anyone this happened because it would destroy everything and everyone.
Yeah. And also, as we'll see later, she's learned to kind of habitually minimize what actually happened and tell
Yes.
herself,
Yes.
tell herself basically, oh, even if I told people, they wouldn't even call that child abuse,
Yeah.
which at this point, we don't actually know what happened. It's interesting. I don't actually know whether what happened in the movie is going to end up being the same thing that happened in the book. And
Sure.
you know, don't tell me, right? But like, it whatever. We'll set that aside for later. But like she has, like you said, a combination of everything would be terrible if I revealed this, and also it's not a big deal. It's a contradiction almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she's just this self justification loop that she has running, or self suppression loop, you could say.
Yep. Yep. So we learn here that Jessie almost tells Ruth everything. She tells her enough to no longer be comfortable around her, and then, as you said, she runs from her too. She moves out the next day, basically ends their friendship, moves in with some other random people. But this is the thing, right? This is I think the true dynamic of the book unfolds at this point. We become very clear. That is what Jessie does. She runs every time she's forced to confront this thing. But King has now put her in a situation where she cannot run anymore. There's no running, both literally because she's handcuffed to a bed, and mentally because there's nowhere to run to. The world order has been turned upside down, and there's nothing to hide behind anymore. And so the book makes it pretty clear, if she's going to live this, if she's going to escape from these physical chains that bind her, she's gonna have to deal with the mental chains that are binding her too, right? This is what Ruth says to her. I know you're willing to do painful things, but you may have to think painful thoughts too. I think the interesting thing of this, though, I love how Jessie's response to this idea is like, why though?
Mhm.
Like, how does confronting what my dad did to me help me get out of this handcuff? And I think the story will shed light on that as we go through. But I just think it's really interesting because I don't think the story has quite drawn that connection fully for us yet. Like the why of how the mental will help the physical.
No, it definitely has not, but I do think that's the core drama of the story is
Yeah.
our attention is being drawn to these questions that Jessie herself doesn't know the answers to. Um, and that's actually what makes this a story, right? It's what gives Jessie an arc
Yeah.
rather than just like, yeah, a woman was handcuffed to a bed and etc.
Sure.
It's like we know that Jessie's going to have to get herself out of this situation. Nobody's coming to help her, and she has to, uh, you know, she has to figure that out, which is an internal journey. Even I think we're about to get to the ordeal with the water, right? And I don't know if you had this impression of the interlude with the water, but like for me, it it just smacks of just like this is a distraction. You're employing your substantial intellect and resourcefulness and just willpower on the wrong objective, on getting the
Interesting.
water, which is a delaying and distracting tactic fundamentally. Water doesn't help you get out of the handcuffs. Water just prolongs this.
Sure.
And so like that was my emotional reaction to it's like, yeah, part of you is bound up in the drama of, is she going to be able to get the water glass? Obviously, I'm not saying that wasn't effective and that it didn't have that impact on me, but the whole time, and then when she succeeds, you're like, so what? Like, okay, you're still handcuffed. I didn't solve. That didn't even address the problem,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
right?
it bought herself time, I think, much in the way. I guess you could make the I did not have this thought. I love that you did, but I did not have this thought while reading this section. But now that you mention it, I mean, you could call it just another coping mechanism, right? It is another way of not dealing with the problem at hand. And I do I with that in mind, I don't think it's an accident that, like, when we get to the straw and the moment where she's about to try to reach the straw into the glass is when she is assaulted most fervently by Ruth, right? Like
Mhm.
the reality of her past and what happened to her. It's like she's relentless in this exact moment. And um
Yeah.
maybe that's part of it, is like you're not dealing with the problem you should be dealing with.
I definitely read that into it. I read like the fact that Ruth is so insistent, particularly at that point where it seems to be at odds with her survival. You're like, Ruth, I thought you were on my side. Why are you interfering here? And the answer is like, this is like the metaphor is that like, this is you just agreeing to go along to get along when in fact you're just being suffocated in your life. Like you getting this water is a completely hollow victory because you said it buys your time, but it's like time to what end? There's so and yeah, I don't know, that struck me really powerfully in this
Sure.
section.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if I'm there with you, but I completely see it.
Mhm.
I mean,
Cool.
like, you just break this down, but she's really thirsty, man.
Sure. Sure. Now, I mean, I think it's interesting. A lot of this book revolves around like physical need, the dog's hunger, Gerald's sexual urges,
Mhm.
her thirst. Like the physical, immediate physical need as a kind of um, distraction or diminishing effect on a person.
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't know. We'll
I
see.
never thought about it that way, but I do like, like what I'm thinking about as you say that is the moment when we like briefly jump back into the dog's head for that one chapter where he's like enjoying the delicacies of Gerald's cheek and lip.
Mm-hmm.
That the book says something to the effect of like he's the smell smells different now because a line has been crossed, a taboo has been dealt with,
Mm-hmm.
and so this kind of connecting event between Gerald's physical need for this kind of violent sex and the dog's physical need for food, immediate food, does have a side effect of fundamentally breaking something inside them
Yeah.
that is irreparable. Some line has been crossed, something is broken. um I'm still not sure if I 100% want to connect that to Jessie and her desire to just get a drink of water, but like I think you're onto something there for sure.
I definitely think the idea of Gerald taking her to the cabin with the handcuffs was crossing that line, breaking that taboo for him,
Yeah.
where now he has crossed the line in his own mind. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I think maybe we'll just keep this in the back of our minds. This idea that like Jessie is very prone to solving problems that are not the problem as a way of keeping her mind busy.
Sure. I think that's fair. I think that's definitely fair. But that does move us to solving that particular problem, Matt. And I just want to say, like, I love this part of the book. Like, I absolutely think the book doesn't work if we don't have like all the underlying physical torment and everything you and I have been talking about the last couple weeks. But what is undoubtedly true that aside from all that, King can just like write the shit out of a scene like this. Like, let's be clear here. I've read this book multiple times. I've seen the Flanagan film multiple times. I know she gets the glass. I know she makes a straw out of the magazine cover and gets to drink the water. I know all this for a fact. And yet, reading these pages, I was absolutely captivated by every single word.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, it's incredibly intense. Even with everything I just said about strongly feeling like it was kind of worse than inconsequential, it's like you're still totally wrapped up in like please get the water.
Yeah.
I kind of
Yeah.
forgot my blessed cheese was it Swiss cheese memory. I wasn't 100% sure whether she got the water or not. So I was very glad that she got the water.
Excellent. Yeah. I really loved this moment as well, talking about like larger themes and how King's like sneaking them in. Don't lose your courage, Jessie, Ruth's voice whispered. Don't worry, she said. I'm going to try. I really am. But sometimes it's good to know what you're up against. I think sometimes that makes a difference. And I'm like, yes, Jessie, it does. Perhaps you should learn what you're up against mentally
Uh-huh.
because it will make a difference.
That's a
Take
good
your own
pull.
advice.
That's a really good pull. I don't think I like connected that to the grander idea. Yeah.
So Jessie can't reach the glass, but she realizes the board above her head on which it sits is not nailed down, and if she leans hard to one side, she can possibly slide the glass towards her. Doing so takes every ounce of strength that she has, but it works. Again, just the writing here I think is just awesome. Slide, you bastard, she screamed at the glass in a high, breathy voice. She had forgotten Gerald, had forgotten she was thirsty, had forgotten everything but the glass, now tilted at an angle so acute that water was almost slopping over the rim, and she couldn't understand why it simply didn't fall over. It didn't, though. It just went on standing where it had stood all along, as if it had been glued to the spot. Slide! Suddenly, it did. So I think this is perhaps where your theory on this is coming from. She forgot Gerald. She forgot she was thirsty. She forgot everything, right? She's singularly focused on this one thing in this one moment.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of acts as a perfect distraction for her where she gets to devote herself to achieving this thing. And then she does achieve it. It's almost, it's funny that, so right after what you just read, the glass slides and it's like a moment of catastrophe, really.
Yeah.
Where it's like the glass slides so perfectly where she wanted it to slide that she can't believe it. Like she was prepared for it to either not slide or for it to just like go off in a weird angle and smash on the floor.
Mhm.
But it's like you couldn't have asked for a better outcome, which is fantastically interesting when I repeat myself and say it doesn't matter. It just delays the inevitable, right?
Mhm.
Um, I just think that's such a fascinating way of handling that because it's like, okay, here's the glass. Now what?
You're still handcuffed to a bed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. I like that. I also like in the cruelest possible twist the realization that happens once she finally does get her hand on the glass that perhaps a eagle eyed reader would have picked up on already. The handcuffs don't allow her to touch her hands to her face. We've
Mhm.
already established this, right? When she tried to cover her eyes, we've already established you can't get this close. And so as she tries to lift the glass up to her mouth, it stops about a foot short, she says, and I think she tries to lean in and can push it a little bit and gets still about 4 inches, 4 or 5 inches too short. This is just so cruel and wonderful.
Yeah. It's interesting that this is a very close third person, but also there are moments when I think King wants us to grasp things before
Yeah,
Jessie,
yeah,
where the way he writes it, it's like it even as she was bringing it toward her mouth, she hadn't quite realized, and
yeah.
it's like, and so you realize it before she does.
Hmm,
Um,
hmm.
again, at the risk of repeating myself, once again, she's so focused on what's right in front of her that she can't see, hey, you're still stuck. You're still
Hmm.
handcuffed. You've solved problem 1A, but you're forgetting about like the structure of the trap that you're in, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And Jesse almost gives up, but this time it's an unexpected voice who speaks up, the voice of the good wife, who tells her not to give up, that there might be another way. I think this is really important, Matt, because we've seen the way the book has kind of been structured up until this point is Ruth has kind of been the voice pushing her towards what I mean, I think we feel like she needs to be pushed towards, right? And then we've
mhm.
had this other voice that has kind of stood back there, like this is the voice that told her, just lay there and take it, just just go, get on to go on, be the good wife, right? And it's very easy in a book like this to build that as like the antagonist voice. Um, Although I guess strictly speaking, like Ruth is like by definitionally Ruth is the antagonist voice because Ruth is the one pushing her towards confrontation and change. But the point is very easy to see the good wife as the voice that we don't like. But I
Mhm.
think the book is trying to make it clear that like that that part of Jesse still serves its purpose.
Yeah.
It serves a purpose, and in this the purpose is to stop like the Ruth side of her is angry and tends to lash out. The good wife side of her is perhaps a bit more considered, a bit more thought in her, and so that stops her from doing something silly like throwing the glass or just breaking the glass or just giving up.
Absolutely. I think yeah, no, I think it's actually really important to realize that. And I think the book leads you to realize like both of these parts of her serve a protective function. If,
Hmm.
if we're going to personify them, they both care about her. They both want what's best for her. They just disagree on what that means.
Yeah. Yep.
And the book, if anything, is a kind of dialectic between these two, ways of being protective. And like, well, maybe again, the good wife has the best of intentions, but maybe you need to do some things that the good wife would consider to be terribly unacceptable to actually ultimately survive, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so that is the end of chapter 9. We move on to chapter 10, where Jesse is told what to do by the good wife, but King, in order to mine maximum tension for this, hides it from us. We don't get to see the plan until we fully see it. What it is, though, is Jesse grabs the advertisement card out of a magazine that was left on the shelf. This is one of those things that I wonder in like someone's reading this book in 50 years, are they going to have no mental image of what this thing looks like whatsoever? Like there could be people alive right now reading this book right now that are like, I don't know, what is
Yeah.
that? Huh?
Magazines, or those things in doctor waiting rooms. Um, yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny.
No, I just like my my son gets a my mother sends my son a subscription to Highlights. You know Highlights magazine,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's a version of Highlights, I forget what it's called, but like for younger kids. And my mom has signed my son up for a subscription to that, so he gets it. Of course, he calls it a book.
Mhm.
And so he sees it every month. He goes, "What's that book for?" And the the other day, my wife corrects him and says, "It's not a book; it's a magazine." And I was like, "He doesn't need to know that. That word's not going to be. It's not going to be useful for him."
It's a flappy book. It's a large flappy book. Um, no, that's funny. I will say I don't think I've ever heard them referred to as blow-in cards. I almost wanted to say this is like a regional, northeastern thing, but it's also possible that I'm just illiterate. I don't know. Have you ever heard them called
I've
blow-in
never
cards?
heard them called that. I looked it up because I had a similar question, and I mean that seems to be just like a phrase. Um,
Mhm.
there's also a bind-in card.
Okay.
Um,
I don't feel too
that are
bad about not
different.
knowing this, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah. But in case you've never seen a magazine before, people, it's just a little card that they put
Yeah.
like to try to convince you to get a subscription to the magazine.
Yep.
Um, and it's also very good at being a straw. So it is, as we talked about, Matt, right when she's about to finally achieve success in this goal of hers, that Ruth shows up again and goes on the offensive, hitting Jessie with the past like she hasn't done before. Turns out, while Jessie pretends like she doesn't remember everything she told Ruth that day in the kitchen, she clearly does, because the Ruth in her head remembers all of it. Darkscore Lake, the eclipse, Jessie saying this phrase, "I could never tell. It would have killed my mom, and even if it didn't, she would have left him, and I loved him. We all loved him. We all needed him. They would have blamed me, and he didn't do anything. Not really." And it's like, fuck that. Yes, he
Mhm.
did. I got so mad. Like the book wants you to be mad at this. Again, we don't actually know the details of what he did. And you and I have future knowledge based on the movie and me the book of exactly what he did. And without spoiling anything, fuck that, Jesse.
No.
Like that again, we get these little hints here and there that a lot of this behavior is fostered upon her by her father, like the daddy told me so, daddy told me this would happen if I told type stuff. So like you kind of can read between the lines and see she's minimizing it because he minimized it, and she learned that that's the appropriate reaction to what happened, is to minimize it. It's not really that big of a deal anyway, but it
Yeah.
would also destroy everyone if you told people.
Right.
Fuck it, fuck that, fuck that.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And just like the most disgusting, well, like every part of it is like fractally disgusting. So I guess there's
Yes.
not like a most disgusting part, but just like the part that fills me with rage is that like he's taking the role of being her father. I'm like actually getting like emotional saying this, and he's using that it's like sacred connection to do this to her,
Yeah.
to fuck with her head.
Hmm.
Um, that's I don't have words for how reprehensible that is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this is a very good book, and it's also a very good movie that we're gonna watch here in a month and a half or so. Um, that doesn't mean it's not a difficult thing to watch. And without spoiling anything, for those that maybe haven't watched the movie yet, the way Flanagan shoots that scene and the way Henry Thomas, who plays her father, in that scene, disgusts me to my core.
Mhm.
And I think it's a fantastic filmmaking because that's exactly what it's supposed to do. And
Yeah.
yeah, it ugh. Just seeing her minimize it absolutely breaks my heart.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. But I think, Matt, I want to return to the question here because I think the book offers us an answer to the question we asked a few minutes ago. Why now? Why do this? And why does this help with the task at hand? Trying to get out of these handcuffs. And I think the book finally gives us an answer. The book says the most obvious answer to that question was also the most unappetizing, because there was an enemy inside, a sad, bad bitch who liked her just the way she was, handcuffed, aching, thirsty, scared, and miserable, just fine. Who didn't want to see the condition alleviated in the slightest, who would snoop to any dirty trick to see that it wasn't. The total solar eclipse lasted just over a minute that day, Jesse, except in your mind. And there it's still going on, isn't it? So that, I think, is a pretty good explanation for why she has to get through the mental to get through the physical, right? Is
Mhm.
that there is a part of her that maybe we haven't actually heard speak up yet, but a part of her who believes all of this is earned and deserved consequences of her
Mhm.
actions. That I deserve this, that I did this to myself, that this is my fault, and this is a just fate for all of that. And that part of her will ultimately prevent her from getting to the point where she is able to do what's fully necessary to escape.
Yeah, I feel like if we've seen a glimpse of that part, it might be the part that spoke up when she was doing the relaxation routine and
Yeah.
started, you know, being horribly negative about her body.
Yeah.
Just I may be off base, but that feels right to me.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, another clever thing King is doing here is that you know fundamentally this is like a woman against herself story. Right. Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. It's hard to break down because it's sort of a woman against her environment because the proximal problem is that she's handcuffed, which is definitely a physical obstacle. But in order to solve the physical obstacle, she has to solve the mental obstacle. So it's a woman against herself, against nature. But also because she's this woman who's highly compartmentalized and has these selves inside her, we have the self that she is against is another sort of agent within her. So it's just it's just funny how King has blown open the normal way of categorizing this type of story, and we sort of have woman against herself, woman against nature, woman against other, all simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why it's great. And again, that's why, this is him experimenting in every way possible, right?
Mm.
He's offering a new perspective he hasn't necessarily written about before. And he's doing it in a way he's never necessarily done before. And he's pushing the envelope. He's wanting to just to kind of challenge himself. And man, it's working.
Yeah, yeah.
um So Jessie begs off the roof voice, promising to discuss all these things after she's gotten her drink of water. And then Jessie finally drinks, almost having the whole thing, but leaving one or two sips there at the very bottom of the glass for later.
Why? So, I mean, okay, so to be silly for a second, what do you think is the smart thing to do here? Like, do you think you should drink all the water straight off, or do you think you should save some? Because I have a thought. I just wonder what you think.
So I think like my gut, like the instinct in any situation like this, and this is probably an instinct born of watching 1,000 television shows and movies, but my instinct is ration, 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 save as much as possible to prolong your survival for as long as possible. But I think that's mostly the case with food and probably not necessarily the case with water.
So I don't know the answer officially, but I feel like if it's a relatively small quantity of water like this, like it's not like she has like a canteen. It's like half a glass of water, right? I feel
Mhm.
like the answer is you want to drink all that water so that it's in your body, and then like it's going to do its watery business in your body, and then it's going to like either be sweated out or urinated out or evaporate, leave your body in some way. But it'll at least it'll be in your body. Whereas if it's just sitting in the glass, it's all that's going to happen is it's going to evaporate, or some amount of it is going to evaporate, and then yeah, you're going to drink it later, but there's just going to be less of it to drink. So maybe there's like a correct answer here, and maybe I'm totally wrong. I feel like if I were in the situation, I would have just drank all the water.
I mean, I guess it depends on the thirst bar on your player character and
Yeah,
how much of the water fills up your thirst bar or not.
that's true, Scott. I wonder how reliable is our sense of thirst anyway? Because very often I'll be like, I'm dying, I'm so thirsty. Just so thirsty. I need a drink of water, and like I'd probably be fine. I'd probably could go, you know, 2 days without drinking and nothing bad would happen.
I don't know if nothing bad would happen. How long can you survive without water?
I,
How
th-
long
I
can you
think you can
live
survive
with?
3 days without water.
So you like think you're hot shit that you can go 2 days without any kind of consequence, right? Yeah.
I
Average
would
body can survive 3 days without any water.
be real thirsty for that to be alive.
I mean, it's an interesting question because we do know that our hunger sense is mostly bullshit, right?
Yeah.
It's just our body being like, "Hey, you're hungry now.
Yeah. Right.
You're starving. You need
Yeah.
food right now."
Yeah.
Do I? Yes. Yes, you do. I think water's probably a little bit more accurate because it's such a much more pressing need most of the time. Um, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
The point is she does save some more, and yeah, you're absolutely right that at least some of it will evaporate away, just
Mhm.
wasting that precious water. My favorite part of all this though is what happens next though, because in her kind of post drink glow, Jessie finds herself content, and this contentment is a shock to the voices in her head who are like, "Hey, how how could what? You're still handcuffed. Why do you feel content?" And what we learn here, it's partially. I think the book says like when you're thirsty enough, even half a glass of water can get you high. But the other part of it, and the part that I find the most interesting, is she's content because for the first time in a long time in her life, she had a goal and a purpose and a way and achieved something that gave her that purpose. Like she tells the story that we already referenced earlier, where she used to be a teacher, then she kind of switched to a substitute teacher, and then Gerald basically kind of coaxed her into getting rid of her teaching contract because it was this is by the way the dumbest like reason I've ever heard, that like the IRS was interested in her for tax purposes because he had expensive cars and it didn't make sense that she would have those cars on a part-time substitute teaching salary. And I'm scratching my head like, didn't they marry filing jointly? Like they know government knows how much money he makes, unless he was being like practicing tax evasion and he was just like telling her to get rid of her job so they don't investigate him. But like the other interpretation is like it's a stupid dumb reason that Gerald had, but she just goes along with it, which I think is probably also accurate.
I was going with that. Yeah, that he's sort of using that as a pretext to just belittle her job and compare it against how much money he makes and make her feel small and worthless.
Yeah.
It is it is an interesting subtextual implication that maybe he was absolutely cheating on his taxes and then blamed her for it, made it seem like she was crazy. I
Mhm.
don't really think that's what's happening, but it is a fun
Probably
thought.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you're so right there. It speaks to kind of the casual cruelty of him,
Mhm.
in that not only did he not know enough of her to understand how important this substitute teaching thing was to her, and she never communicated that to him, but also he never like bothered to notice either.
Mhm.
Um, but like, there's no, there's no actual reason to do it. Like it's not as if, they had children and he's saying, "No, you need to be a stay-at-home mom to take care of the kids while I'm at work because I make all the money and you don't make up with the money. So stop that foolish thing and be a stay-at-home mom." They don't have children, right? So like it's literally just about what, as you said, belittling her, control, knowing that she's just at home
Mhm.
being the good wife.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of despicable.
Being dependent on him, I think this
Yeah,
connects it kind of indirectly, but you can see the connection between that and him
yeah,
enjoying the idea of her in handcuffs.
yeah. No, I think you're totally right there. So yeah, the reason she feels content is because ever since she gave up that substitute teaching contract, she hasn't really had a thing that is hers that she could do that could give her life purpose. And this success here, this smart thinking with the straw, which it was smart thinking, right? I mean, like, I take your point about how ultimately this doesn't get her out of the handcuffs, but like it was creative problem solving
Sure.
to recognize, oh yeah, there was that little card I felt up there, and couldn't that be a straw? Like that was very creative, and her own voices kind of give her a compliment and pat her on the back, and it's a sense of agency, sense of small victory, sense of control over her life that she just hasn't had in forever. So she feels pretty happy about that, actually.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. We're not meant to question her resourcefulness and drive,
Yeah.
we're meant to question, like, well, what is it that's keeping you from using this effectively?
Hmm. Yeah. So with that, Jessie settles down into an uncomfortable sleep as we leave her behind and head back to the dog formerly known as Prince, which, by the way, I was convinced that King did this on purpose
Uh-huh.
and named the dog Prince because of the artist Prince,
Mhm.
and like was doing things like the former Prince and making these kind of yuck yuck references specifically because of the artist formerly known as Prince when he was having a contract dispute with his label and decided to rename himself the artist formerly known as Prince.
Uh-huh.
Um,
And made a bunch of magazines change their typeface so they could print the symbol that he made up.
yeah, that was his other name, was just that symbol that,
Yeah.
yeah, no one had typeface for. So yeah, great stuff. Love Prince. But all that happened in 1993, and this book was written in 1992. So that's not anything intentional on King's behalf. It's just a funny coincidence.
That's such a bizarre coincidence. Utterly strange,
Yeah,
fascinating. I
yeah.
love it.
Um, so I do appreciate Matt. Like we talked about this already, but like the book is constantly making connections between Prince and other characters. Like, Prince and Jessie. Like in this moment, it says much like Jessie was now sated from the water, Prince was now sated from the Gerald he was eating. But obviously the most clear connections are between Prince and Gerald, Prince and Jessie's father, and we'll see how this all kind of plays out here in just a little bit.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that's great. I love, so just to talk about the eating Gerald thing, like, I love this idea that, eating a human is taboo for a dog,
hmm,
which is not something you ever think about, but it's probably a taboo for dogs. If dogs have taboos, then eating human is a taboo for dogs, right?
yeah, yeah,
But Hunger has pushed it past the point where he's getting used to the idea of it, and I love the s- moving on from the bicep to the face is, to me, just the perfect visual, visceral way of conveying the taboo is gone,
yeah,
because you can imagine being like, okay, I'm shamefully eating this thing. I'm going to eat a part of it that kind of is like an extremity. And now eating the face, that's like, well, oh, you don't see this as a being of any like relevance anymore. It's just meat.
yeah.
Um,
No, completely. I think you're totally right there. The image of Prince ripping the lower lip off Gerald is one of those things that I will just never fully get out of my head.
yeah,
And it's, I mean, like you talked last week about how you're an actual cannibal and you just love eating humans.
yeah,
I
right.
think I think even you would be like, I'm not going to eat someone's lip.
That's where the book got me, because I'd still be at the bicep part,
Yeah.
at least for a while.
All right, we move on to chapter 11, and this chapter sees us diving into Jesse's bad dream. It is August 1965, 2 years after the incident on Darkscore Lake. And we quickly realize we're in Jesse's brother's birthday party, which of course is the day of the aforementioned goosing. I really hate it.
Yeah, uh,
I really hate it.
yeah,
We see here early, Matt, that like we learned that Jessie has convinced her family to come back to their year-round home for her brother's birthday. They were at Darkscore Lake. They usually celebrate it there, but her brother wants to come home for his birthday to hang out with his friends, and Jessie kind of gets on board. And it's not for any reason. Don't think about it too much, Jesse. It's not. It's just that weird mineral smell of the lake. Nothing else, right? Nothing else. No other problems. This is again how the idea of smell comes into play again.
yeah. I think it's actually some pretty masterful writing that King is crystal clear with us, the reader, that that's not why.
Yeah.
But like within Jesse's frame of mind, she's still kind of going along with the program that, yeah, it was just the smell. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we get this here. When it comes to moving him, to changing his mind, his younger daughter may have more luck than the rest of them put together. Jessie often finds a way into her father's mind by means of some loophole or secret passage denied to the rest of the family. Sally believes, with some justification, that their middle child has always been Tom's favorite, and Tom has fooled himself into believing that none of the others know. Maddie and Will see it in simpler terms. They believe that Jessie sucks up to their father, and that he in turn spoils her rotten. I hate this so much. I hate it. It's disgusting. Again, like what you're talking about for like the fundamental betrayal of the father child relationship, the father daughter relationship. Like it's gross. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So to be clear, this is after the incident, 2 years
it
after the
is.
incident,
Yes.
and still, you know, she evidently loves her father. In fact, they seem to have the closest relationship out of him and all the other kids,
Hmm.
and that's what's so uncomfortable about this. One of the many things that's uncomfortable about it is that he has, you know, manipulated and played her into this situation, and thinking about what that is doing to her on the inside is really upsetting.
Yeah, and one thing we haven't seen yet, and maybe we'll see more of this later, but I think one of the things this does introduce to us, you know, we've had this conversation several times now of if she tells, it will just kill her mother, it will destroy their family. And this is the first time we see briefly her mother's point of view on her husband and her daughter, right?
Mhm.
Like, and we see here Sally believes with some justification that their middle child has always been Tom's favorite, and Tom has fooled himself into believing none of the others know, right? So, like, there's a part of you that wonders then, you know, she tells herself the story of it would kill my mom if I told her this. There's a part of you that wonders, on some level, does your mom already suspect that something's going on here? On some level, is your mom like Tom thinks he's got them all fooled, right? He
Mhm.
thinks he's got them all fooled, that his relationship with Jessie is just like the other ones, but everyone else knows better. And I wonder if there's some sort of like danger sense that is in Sally, that if she went to her mom and told her, it would be like, I kind of thought that might be. And it
Mhm.
would not kill her. It would just confirm a fear she had.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for denial and dynamics like that.
Hmm.
I think, you know, it's possible that I'm just being inattentive, but one thing that jumps out to me as we're sitting here is, you know, I remember very few mentions of Maddie. Right, we have a lot of mentions of Will, that because he's her brother who goosed her,
Hmm.
and thus he's sort of the main character of this little sidetrack. But other than the fact that she has an older sister, I don't know a single molecule of information about this older sister.
Yeah.
And it just kind of makes you wonder, like, did he also molest the older sister?
Yeah.
Uh,
Good.
it, this almost seems to imply either that he didn't or that Jesse doesn't think so. But
Yeah.
I don't want to overinterpret this.
Yeah.
So just to, I just think it's kind of interesting and borderline weird that we know so little about her older sister.
Yeah. I think that's a good thing to clock. I think we should keep our eye on that for sure.
Okay.
Because yeah, I mean the trend of Jesse, and I'm not confirming or denying this by the way, but the trend of Jesse has been she downplays and minimizes people if there's some uh unfavorable association with them, right?
Hmm.
This is what she did with Ruth, this is what she did with Nora, like, and as we saw, obviously those relationships were a lot more important and impactful to her than possible. So yeah, maybe the reason why we haven't talked about Maddie yet is because something happens, but maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love Matt. I want to talk about this dream a little bit here because obviously this is a dream, but we don't really know that at first, right? Like, we're, it's not even written. It's not written at first as if it's a dream or even necessarily just a memory. Like King is just writing this as if like we've just flashed back and are just experiencing these events at the
Mm.
time. And it isn't until later into the dream that it kind of reveals itself as a dream. Um, and so it is really this interesting framing here where like everything seems happy, everything seems great, and yet we know what's about to happen next. We know that her brother is about to walk up to her and goose her. She hits him, and the whole party will collapse around that.
Mm.
I just really thought that was interesting. Like he could have written it as if it's clear it's a dream from the beginning, but he did not.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's once again the benefits of having this be this non-standard narrative where we're having this really close third person is we're melding into the dream state kind of in the way that we all actually fall asleep, where you're not really aware
Yeah.
of what's happening, and neither is she, right?
Hmm.
So we're with her in her experience, which is the first person experience of sort of just suddenly being in the dream.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just overall, I think King does a fantastic job in this book, kind of tracking the twists and turns that a mind takes on going into sleep, coming out of sleep, uh, uh, greater and lesser degrees of mental fogginess, and all these things, like it's just real at a really minute level. It's great.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Um, so suddenly, Matt, the song that is playing on the radio switches to a different Marvin Gaye song, but the bad one, which is a song called "Can I Get a Witness?" and and we kind of realize in the moment that it wasn't just her brother's goosing that triggered all this. It was the goosing at this moment with this song playing. We don't know what is specific about this song, but if you listen to the lyrics of the song, I think it's not like an accident that Stephen King picked this song, right? Like the lyrics of the song is, "I love too hard, but I believe that all that a woman should be loved that way. But it hurts me so inside to see her treat me so unkind. Somebody somewhere tell her it's unfair." So like the implication here is pretty obvious, right? Like I love too hard. I'm and I'm not saying this is what Marvin Gaye is like meaning by the song, but like when you put this song in this book with the events that have happened in this book, it's like I hurt you, but this is the way it's supposed to be, and you're not being fair to me by having this reaction. This
Mhm.
is Gerald's reaction. This is her father's reaction. Like this is just absolutely perfect. So it's very possible this song has specific connotations to Dark Score Lake, but like the words independent of that are incredibly effective at conveying exactly what we want to feel in this moment.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because it's kind of a double meaning, right? Where you can say "I love too hard" as meaning like, "Oh, I'm just such a romantic.
Yeah,
I wear my heart on my sleeve, and it makes it easy for women to hurt me." But it can also be like, "I
yeah.
love too hard,"
And
and
the
it's
former
yeah,
is, I think, what the like this is what Marvin Gaye and the writers of the song are going for is yeah, I'm too passionate, I'm too emotional, and people are like women aren't treating me kind
yeah.
for it.
But how often is that used as an excuse for just being a
Yes.
giant asshole, though, right?
Yes. Yes. 100%.
And being irresponsible. Yeah.
Mhm. Yep. And so this is where this turns into a dream, right? Because as Jessie looks up, she sees instead of one of her little friends looking at her is instead Nora Callahan watching her, her therapist. And that's when she kind of it almost becomes a lucid dream at some level, right? Because she realizes she's in a dream and she realizes what is about to happen next, but she feels powerless to stop it. She asks Nora for help. Nora can't help her. She asks Ruth for help, but none of them can help her. She feels the goose coming, Matt, and knows instantly that the hand is too large. It's not a child hand, it's an adult hand. And she turns expecting it to be her father. And then we get this. He did something like this to her during the eclipse, a thing she supposed the whining cult of Selvers, the live in the pastors like Ruth and Nora would call child abuse. And I just want to shake this woman and be like, no, Jessie, literally everyone in the world. Like, first of all, like, let's just, we don't know exactly what he did to her, but the just text description just says that the goosing reached into her panties just below her vagina, right?
Mhm.
Like so like I don't care what the rest of the details are of what happened. That's already child abuse. It's not just the cult of Selvers, the live in the pastors. That's like this way she frames people complaining about this as being too self-obsessed is like the most heartbreaking and infuriating thing in the world.
Yeah, right. It's one of her many mechanisms that she has to both minimize and distance.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yep. But Matt, when she turns around expecting to see her father, it's not dear old dad. It's Gerald, naked and goosing her and telling her that she liked it. His game again, right? All of this is actually just his game again. She actually likes it, he says. She's always liked it. She knows it, just admit it to herself. And he offers her two choices. He says, put on the handcuffs or kill me, essentially. Like,
Mhm.
swing the mallet. or put the handcuffs back on. But Jessie won't. She can't choose in that
Mm.
moment.
Yeah, I think King is helping us connect the dots here,
Yeah.
which we pointed out. Sometimes he does this. He helps out his readers. He says, "Hey, I'm doing a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
The game, Gerald's game with the handcuffs. It's connected to the
Yeah.
great. The Gerald's game is bigger than the handcuffs. It's the game is this world that she's been trapped in ever
Yeah.
since this traumatic event happened to her."
Yeah, we've talked about this with King in the past, right? That he likes to build complicated metaphors for things, but
Mhm,
also he like wants you to know them.
mhm,
And so like he will spell them out in a very deft way, I think, where he never makes you feel stupid for not having realized it up until the point he spells it out for you, but he also never makes it to where he's like, yeah, no, I got it, Steven, let's move on. Like it's
mhm.
just he's very deft when he does it, I think.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of you feel rewarded. Actually, you're like,
Yeah.
yes, I got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um So suddenly everyone is looking at her, and it's not just people from the party, but now everyone from Jessie's life, like the first boy she slept with, everyone from her life is looking at her, looking and laughing. And Jessie's naked now too, with Daddy's little girl written across her chest in lipstick. And then we get this. She looks up and sees that Gerald's knowing, disconcerting smile has turned into a gaping wound. Suddenly, the stray's dog's blood soaked snout pokes out between his teeth. The dog is also grinning, and the head comes shoving out between its fangs like the onset of some obscene birth belongs to her father. His eyes, always bright blue, are now gray and haggard above his grin. They are Olivia's eyes, she realizes, and then she realizes something else as well. The flat mineral smell of lake water, so bland and yet so horrible, is everywhere. Man, what an image.
Yeah. Seriously, I love that it's simultaneously just like rich with this literary imagery, but also kind of a very believable dream of just like dream logic, and like the part where she's paralyzed and is asking someone to help, but she can't move. And then, just weird visual shit happening. I don't know. This is the things that happen in this dream feel like my dreams. This just feels like a very realistic dream.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. And it's just a wonderful, terrifying image that, as you said, makes the metaphor clear here.
Mhm.
Gerald, dog, dad, all connected,
Right.
literally,
Yep.
physically, right here in front of you. Yep. Who's Olivia? What am I stupid?
Is Olivia the woman who was talking was in the uh women's consciousness session? Was
Oh
her
yeah,
name
yeah.
Olivia?
You're right. You're right. The woman with the burns
Yeah.
on her breasts. Yeah, yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I had that same thought when I first wrote the quote down, and then I solved it, and then I forgot it again.
Okay.
So we're back.
Glad I could somehow help.
Yeah. All right. Chapter 12. Chapter 12, Matt, is a very, very short one. We just jump real quick into the perspective of Prince, the dog, again, as he finishes his latest Gerald snack. But then he catches wind of a smell that doesn't smell right. It scares him enough that he bolts out of the house and into the woods just outside it. He barks at the strange, threatening smell. Um, we didn't need this passage, right?
Mhm.
Like, I think had we just gone right to chapter 13 and Jesse sees a man in the corner, I think that would have worked. I think what King is doing here, though, is he wants us to not doubt the physicality of whatever is in the room,
Mhm.
right? I think he wants us to take away with it the idea that no, there is something wrong and weird here. It is not Jesse's imagination. This is something. Now, what it is it just a man? Is it a monster? Is it a ghost, some
Yeah.
supernatural thing? We don't know yet, but he wants us to know that it is some physical thing that has entered the space that the dog has detected and is freaking out about.
Yeah. Yeah, the dog having this reaction and describing it as like almost uncannily wrong, is
Yeah.
just way more unnerving than I think it would be if he just showed up in a room and then you're just wondering like is this just a hallucination or even just shadows like she
Yeah.
thinks. And I think like you just said, part of you is aware, you're reading a Stephen King story, and Stephen King is aware that you're reading a Stephen King story. So it's not off the table that this would be a ghoul or a creature or a demon or something.
Yeah.
Um, and he knows that that's on your mind. So I think he's playing with that perception a little
Yeah.
bit here.
Every time we have a conversation like that, I just think of Friends, and it's, they don't know that we know that they know we know they know.
That's
But he
what being a
does.
good writer is being aware of when they know that you know that they know that you know that they know.
All right, Matt, chapter 13, our final chapter of the evening. The opening of this chapter is so incredibly Stephen King, and I love it because the events of the opening of this chapter can basically just be summarized as Jessie wakes up from the dream. But instead of just having Jessie wake up from the dream, King constructs this really elaborate metaphor connected to diving. Diving is something that we learn. I don't think we knew that. I think this is a new information to us, Matt, that Jessie uh, got really into diving and was actually competitive and went like all state one year in diving. So it's
Mm,
something she was very good at. I wonder if we can try to link that back to something. I can't do it on the spot, so we'll just think about it.
okay.
So yeah, instead of just waking up, he constructs this metaphor around Jesse's diving of when you've dove down into a pool and you're swimming back up to the surface. The temperature of the pool water is not uniform. There are varying temperatures. Temperature of any water source is not uniform across it. Different levels have different temperatures. And as you swim through them, you feel different temperatures. You feel different things as you go up. And he basically, this is what Jesse's waking up was like, traveling through different temperatures of water, layers of cold, of confusion, of warm comfort, and of chilly pain. As she eventually dives to the surface of consciousness, I just love it. It's so Stephen King, man. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely. Once again, capturing a lot of these impossible to pin down subjective feelings that come with waking and sleeping and all the intermediate stages.
Yeah. Yep. Jessie wakes up. She's unsure of the time. She's telling all of her voices that the dream she just had was just a dream, and sure, it probably means something, but to Matt's point, it doesn't help her get out of these damn cuffs now, does it? So it's useless. Just don't think about it.
Yeah.
And as she's trying to look around to decide what to do next, she sees a man, a man in the corner. What a moment. What a moment.
Yeah. Seriously, like I basically knew this was coming from the
Yeah.
movie, but I still got like literal full body chills uh when it hit. I think part of it is how perfectly it catches Jesse and by association you off guard, because it's like she's thinking very normal, like a very normal sequence of thoughts, and it's almost like the paragraph is interrupted, and at the moment her attention is grabbed, and then it's just a man in the corner, and
Yeah.
everything past there you're just like, what?
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, there's just something about this scenario that plays on your imagination.
And I think in a first time read too, it is a swerve in kind of what you perhaps expected the book to do at this moment, right?
Mhm.
Like we're almost 200 pages into the novel now. Kind of the structure of this thing has been set. We have a character who's trapped in a bed and is confronting her past, and the dialogue that exists within the story of the book is just between her and the voices in her head that represent different aspects of her. And then suddenly we get this wrinkle on it all, and we're like, wait, I don't know what to do with this. And that's part of why it's so shocking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think the other part of why it's so shocking is just because it's so fucking relatable. Of like, I think every one of us has at one point in our lives experienced that. I see something out of the corner of my eye that my brain decides to make look like a person shaped thing. And there's a brief moment, maybe less than a second, but maybe a little bit more, where you are utterly and completely convinced there's a person in the room that you didn't think was there. And just the absolute panic that sweeps over you in that
Yeah.
moment. Um, the difference, of course, is that for me, I'm like, oh no, that's a coat rack. And then that panic goes away and I can get back to normal. Whereas for Jesse, there's like actually a man in the corner. So that panic just transmutes. It doesn't
Mhm.
just filter out and go away.
But it takes its time to, like, I think that's one of the fun things the book does is it really lingers. It doesn't immediately break that ambiguity. It keeps
Yeah.
us in suspense for a bit where she goes back and forth a couple times on like, no, 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 no. It's not, I'm just really like my head's not on right. And it's just there's shadows, but it really looks like there's a man there.
Yeah.
And but like his proportions are all wrong. So that can't be true. But no, there's definitely a man there.
Yeah.
Whereas normally, like when you experience this kind of thing in real life, it kind of crescendos and then it goes down. Like, and I think very often, we experience what, like you just said, you either see a shape or you hear a noise in the night, and you think, "Man, that really sounded like a footstep in the hallway right outside my door," or somebody exhaling, or or the worst is like that kind of sounded like somebody quietly shutting the back door to the house. And then you have to have a little conversation with yourself where you're like, did it sound enough like that that I need to get up?
Yes.
And then it always turns out to be like the AC blue piece of paper off the countertop or something. But like, you have to have that conversation with yourself. But that's what we're watching, right? That's what we're watching. Jesse have that conversation with herself.
Yep. Yep. And I do also love, I think you're absolutely right that he holds this for just the perfect amount of time. But I also love this part as she begins to like actually process the idea that this is a person that's in the room. And when the initial fight or flight terror goes away, it changes to a different thing. And I love this writing so much. Her first terror of him began to abate a little, but what replaced it was somehow worse. Horror and an unreasoning, atavistic revulsion. Jessie later thought that the wellspring of these feelings, the most powerful negative emotions she had ever experienced in her life, including those which had swept her only a short time before as she watched the stray dog preparing to dine on Gerald, was the creature's utter stillness. It had crept in here while she slept, and now merely stood in the corner, camouflaged by the ceaseless ebb and flow of shadows over its face and body. I love this as like it's a perfect way to describe what happens to you or what would happen to you in this situation where you have this initial moment of terror, of pure fear that there's a person here that shouldn't be here, and then that goes away, and it changes to a different kind of fear that's like, why is he not moving? What
Hmm.
the fuck's he doing here? And why is he just standing there? It's like it's the same source of the fear, but a completely different kind of it. Like I love that, like horror and an unreasoning revulsion at like, this is so against what anything should be. Like if this man was in here to hurt me or kill me or rob me, like he would do it.
Right.
Why isn't he doing it?
Yeah. And the use of the word creature here to describe
Yeah.
the man, I think, plays into this idea that perhaps it is a supernatural presence. At this point in the book, like by the end of this week's reading, it's totally on the table that this is a supernatural presence. Like there's
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
nothing that happens that uh, rules that out.
Yep. Yep. I agree. But the voices in her head want Jessie to talk to him to establish contact and ask for help. After all, if it's just a man that's crept into her room in the middle of the night and is just creepily standing in a corner and whose proportions is all wrong, he can just like throw her the handcuff keys,
Right.
right?
Right. Let's be practical.
Yeah. I love this line though. What are you? She sobbed. A man, a devil. What in God's name are you? The wind gusted. The door banged. Before her, the figure's face seemed to change, seemed to wrinkle upward in a grin. There was something horribly familiar about that grin, and Jessie felt the core of her sanity, which had borne this assault with remarkable strength until now, at last began to waver. Daddy? She whispered. Daddy, is that you? That the thing smiles even more when she calls it daddy is horrifying.
Uh-huh.
I think that the most horrifying moment in all of this, though, is not the man standing in the corner, is not him creepily smiling at her, but in the moment where she decides that this is her father, her terror goes away, her legs fall open, and she resigns herself to what he must be here to do, right? She says, all right, go ahead. How could I stop you anyway? That is heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a terrible, depressing sense of reality to this kind of impossible scenario where it's almost like she's been waiting for this her whole life. Like,
Yeah.
despite its impossibility, despite knowing her father is dead, part of her is almost like, oh, this was inevitable that he would come back to life for this purpose, because
Mhm.
that's how broken she is by this.
Yeah. Yeah. But of course, it's not Tom. Tom Mahout. How do you pronounce it? Their last name?
I think Mahout is how the
Mahout.
audiobook reader
Mahout.
said it.
It's a terrible name.
Yeah,
Fuck you, Tom. So apologize to any of the Mahouts out there listening.
yeah,
Um, Tom Mahout is dead and buried, and it's not him. It's not his ghost. Jessie rejects all of this, telling the thing, that it's not real, that it's only made of moonlight. And that's when it reaches forward to show its case, Matt. A case full of bones and jewelry. And despite desperately wanting to be a dream, Jessie feels nothing but a sense of absolute reality. This is not a dream. This is real. This is a man or a thing or a monster or something standing in front of her, digging through his case and showing her the jewelry and bones as it silently laughs and grins, its shoulders going up and down. And Jessie can take no more. She passes out, and thus ends our chapter. Holy shit. That's some scary shit, man.
yeah. I love it. I love it so much.
Mhm.
Um, I was surprised at how scary it actually is. Where, yeah, I think it's because it's relatable. It's what we talked about a minute ago. It's like the idea of somebody being in your house suddenly, super relatable. Something
Yeah.
we've all sort of, not that we've all been in that situation, but we've all felt like, is there somebody here? Um, so, and then he takes it, and then he just like turns the knob and turns the knob, and just he just turns it up as far as it'll go until the character just passes out from terror.
Yeah.
Can't turn it up anymore.
It's really funny though, because like one of the things we said in the first episode was that many people consider this book unadaptable, and I understand the reasoning for that. It's for everything we've talked about, that this is really a one woman show where most of the characters are voices in the head, and how do you properly adapt that? But getting to the end of this week's reading, all I could think about was how fucking effective this scene in Flanagan's film is. And not just this scene, but also even the her getting the water thing. Like, there is something inherently cinematic about several of the set pieces in this week's reading. So, like, while I agree it's like a heavy lift to figure out a way to make this story function in a movie, there's a lot of the individual beats and moments that are just inherently great to watch. And I think that's like just true is going to be true through the rest of the book as well.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Like, despite the part of you thinking, how could you make a movie out of this? Is that it's actually built out of set pieces strung together by the sort of meandering string of consciousness stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. All right. Well, that is the end of this week's reading. Next week, we are going to continue with chapters 14 through 24. A lot of chapters. We could have some shorter ones, I think, as we continue to move through the book. I think that'll put us. It's the halfway point, number of episode wise, but I think it's a little over halfway, page count wise. So we're making our way through it pretty quick.
awesome.
All right, Matt, before we go for the week, we have some discussion questions to discuss. This week's question that we'll be reading answers for was from our episode 2 weeks ago. We're gonna get this down eventually. We're gonna do it. I have faith. Um, it'll be our question that we asked based on Ouija: Origin of Evil, the final Mike Flanagan film we talked about before heading into Gerald's game, right? And what was that question? Remind us.
That question was, what's your favorite prequel that's surprisingly better than the first movie? And we got some fantastic answers, as always. First, from Jiraxis Eridar Lord, keeping the trend of Twin Peaks-based discussion answers, the best prequel that may be better than the original is Fire Walk With Me. It does everything a good prequel should do. It gives context to the original work while standing on its own as a story. It's a film that made me completely reevaluate the linchpin character of the series. I'm not sure if the series alone does a good job of making you care about Laura, but by God does the movie.
I have watched Twin Peaks, as we've talked about before. I know you have not. I have not seen Fire Walk With Me though, so I am I've we need to come up with a pun name for a David Lynch thing, so we can do a David Lynch thing.
That's
That's what prevents us from doing focus on directors is punny
Yep,
names. So
that's the requisite.
yeah.
I did read a David Foster Wallace essay about David Lynch the other day,
Hmm.
that made some remarks about the relative role of Fire Walk with Me relative to Twin Peaks. So despite not having watched either of those things, I feel well qualified to speak at length about what Jiraxis Eridor Lord is saying here.
Well, please go ahead then.
You know what? I'll spare you. Why don't you move on with the next?
All right. Next, we have Karena 2020, who says Godfather Part 2 is the only correct answer, showing the start of the Corleone Empire, how Vito came over from Italy, working his way up, hustling, and doing what he had to do to provide for his family, gave a whole new dimension to the Godfather world. This is a great answer because Godfather Part 2 has the distinct privilege of being a sequel and a prequel simultaneously. It is both of those things, and it is also a very, very good movie.
Yeah, no, that's great. I when you first started reading this question, I was like, it's not a prequel, and then I realized it. Yes, it is.
Yeah, it
And,
is.
and it's great. It's kind of like the best part of that movie, right?
Do you think it's weird that Hollywood has not mined Godfather for parts? Like, why have we not had a Godfather reboot? It just seems like the IP hounds would be all over that.
I bet they will. I bet there's somebody standing in the way of it, and then when they die or something expires,
Hmm.
we're gonna get so many Godfather. We're gonna get like Luca Brasi movie, you know, backstory.
Yeah.
We're gonna get, yeah, it's gonna be a
I don't
trash
think it's
fire.
Coppola. I don't think he has any kind of ownership of the property. So I don't think it's him. But yeah, maybe someone does. You're right.
I don't know. I don't know.
This reminds me like the year when The Great Gatsby went into the public domain. I think it was last year or maybe the year before. Like the day it went into the public domain, there was a new book from the Nick Carraway perspective. I think it was just called like Nick or something. Like the day it went,
Uh-huh.
like they had it ready to go the second it fell
It's
into
hilarious.
into fair use. Yeah.
I love it. All right. Next answer from Pear Jane. Rushing here in case Baby Can You Dig Your Sam has the same idea as me. The Barry Levinson directed, Steven Spielberg produced Young Sherlock Holmes. While I'd never suggest that it's better than any of the other bajillion versions of Sherlock Holmes out there, it's the one that made me fall in love with Watson and Holmes, and the reason why I still watch every single new adaptation. Young Sherlock Holmes depicts teenaged Holmes and Watson meeting as boys' school roommates in London, and they investigate a ploy by an Egyptian cult to kidnap teenage girls because reasons and probably racism.
You didn't
It's
say the hashtags, Matt.
sorry, hashtag reasons and hashtag probably racism.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot Elon Musk told us that hashtags were bad now. I
Yeah,
forgot
we
that.
can't use them anymore. I
Yeah.
don't know. Um, It's less a prequel and more retelling set earlier in their lives, but I don't care. I'm sticking with it. The fun element is that the cult murders folks by hitting them with hallucinatory blow darts, resulting in some delightful, if antiquated, practical special effects sequences. All in all, we get Sherlock Holmes, a bit of a love story, fencing, underground Egyptian chanting, supernatural-ish elements, old-timey London, and of course the young, befuddled Watson forging a friendship with the gangly, neurodivergent fellow we all love. If you happen to catch it on cable some Saturday afternoon, it's 2 hours well spent. Well said, Pear Jane, and I love this movie. I haven't seen it in years and years, but the stained glass night, it's the scariest thing I'd ever seen in my life up to that point as a child, and I love it.
I think we've reached the rare something Matt has seen that Scott hasn't seen
Oh,
because I have not seen this film.
I don't remember if it's good, but I remember it very fondly. I think the stained glass night might actually be one of the first uses of CGI in a film.
I think that's correct, and I think that's why I know it. Like, because
Mhm.
I was like, I definitely haven't seen this film, but the second y'all mentioned Stained Glass Night, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that, and I think it's just because it is the first fully CGI character.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fun as a kid where you're a little bit confused because they're using blow darts, and then the people will hallucinate something that kills them, and it's almost like a Final Destination-esque thing where like they they die because they ran into a river or something, running away from the hallucination. And yeah, it's a fun movie.
Great, great. Next we have Chrysalian or Chrysalian. I'm gonna go with Chrysalian.
Yeah.
Who says my prequel pick would be the video game Halo Reach. After sinking thousands of hours into Halo 3 as a teen with multiple campaign playthroughs, sweaty ranked games, and tons of custom games, I kind of got everything I could out of it. And then bam, new Halo, with a campaign focusing on the backstory of the Spartans and how the intergalactic conflict began, coupled with the introduction of abilities in a shooter and map editor that had endless possibilities. Before I knew it, another 1,000 hours went into this day, and there wasn't a single and went until this day there wasn't a single Xbox game that could replicate what these two games have given me. That's great. I have never been an Xbox guy, so I've really only played a little bit of Halo.
Yeah. Funny story. I my closest friend in high school, he and I played Halo 1 together on co-op, and then we played Halo 2 together on co-op, and then what we would do in the summers during college, we went to different colleges, it was we'd play Halo together. We'd play all the Halos during the summers. And a few months ago, he came and visited me after 20 years. And
Did you play Halo?
we tried to play Halo. And the funny thing is, modern Halo doesn't have co-op and sucks.
Why would
it is
they
a
do
shitty
that?
game, and they ruined it. They ruined our friendship.
It's Microsoft's fault.
Yep, it is.
They've ruined your friendship. You're not friends anymore. You had
Yeah.
to you just send them home.
Right.
Like if we can't play Halo together,
Yeah.
what is even the fucking point?
Why are you even here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I love the old Halos. Finally, not finally. Aqua Lungfish says, even though I'm not sure I actually rank it higher, I guess I'll go with Better Call Saul as a better prequel than Breaking Bad. It's certainly very good, but I think it's more balanced on quality, while Breaking Bad has some incredibly high highs and somewhat lower lows. One of the most interesting things about the show is how it takes a character who you think you understand, Saul, and spends like 5 years working him up to that point, and it does it without a lot of fan service callbacks to Breaking Bad. There's a few, especially as the show catches up on time to Breaking Bad, but most of the best stuff involves characters original to the show.
I mean, as longtime listeners know, I think Breaking Bad is one of your and I's favorite shows of all time.
Yeah.
And I am still embarrassed to say I have not made my way all the way through Better Call Saul yet. But what I have seen, I really, really liked. Vince Gilligan, man, he's a good showrunner. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm working my way up to Better Call Saul. I finally watched El Camino the other day. So,
okay, first of all, the other day was several months ago. Because I remember when you mentioned this to me, and that is not working your way up to Better Call Saul.
There's a progression, okay? And the progression leads through El Camino.
It doesn't have to.
It's a movie that doesn't have Saul in it. I acknowledge that. But nonetheless.
Did you see that Vince Gilligan said recently that we need to stop doing the whole anti-hero protagonist thing now? He's like, we need more good guys as protagonists.
Yeah. I didn't see that, but I can imagine him thinking I perfected this. Why do they keep doing it?
Last but not least, we have eman9001 who says, I gotta shout out one of my all-time favorite video games, Devil May Cry 3. The first Devil May Cry paved the way for a new type of hack and slash game, and Devil May Cry 2 largely flopped, though I maintain the game is better than people give it credit for. Devil May Cry 3, though, is a perfect character action game. The combat is deeper than damn near any game you can find. The story at its worst moments is super fun, silly fest, while our protagonist eats pizza before riding a rocket like a skateboard. At its best moment, the story tackles thematic elements about dealing with the sins of the father shockingly well. As a perfect prequel, it deepens the lore and understanding of the games that came before it. In Devil May Cry 1, we see Dante, our protagonist, be tricked into killing his brother Virgil. The game builds Virgil into one of the most iconic villains in gaming history and focuses on the complicated relationships between him and Dante, a relationship that would define the entire franchise after this game came out. Devil May Cry 3 is both a 10 out of 10 game and a 10 out of 10 prequel. Did you play these
Cool.
games?
No, I was actually looking them up because I'm like, is that the one with the guy?
Yes.
No, I have not played Devil May Cry.
I have played a fair amount of them. I played the first. I remember. I definitely agree that when the first Devil May Cry came out, like it was like, holy shit, you can do this. This is amazing. I don't think I ever played 2 or 3. I kind of like dipped my toes in at random points. Like they made like a reboot that they just called DMC at one point, because that that's the cool thing to do. I played that one. It was all right.
It's very funny. DMC. I was gonna say early 2000s, and then no, apparently 2013 is when it came out. So
Yeah, that was the reboot, the gritty reboot of Devil May Cry. DMC.
so gritty.
It's like how KFC is not actually called Kentucky Fried Chicken anymore. They're just called KFC. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it doesn't stand for anything. Well, they can't legally because there's not any chicken in the food that they sell.
Is that true?
No,
I heard that, but I don't think that's true.
No, I think it's a joke that you kind of go, really, and then yeah.
It's just like Dunkin' Donuts isn't called Dunkin' Donuts anymore. They're just Dunkin'. I think it's the same reason, because those aren't donuts.
Yeah, they're partially gelatinated, non-dairy gum-based rings.
All right. That is the end of our answers. Thank you, everyone. We got a bunch of great ones for that. That was some great answers. We appreciate them. All right. Next week's question, or 2 weeks from now's question. I had a lot of trouble with this one, Matt. So let's read this, and then the people can judge my idea.
All right. What is the greatest or scariest moment of sudden intrusion by a man or monster into a story?
And so I don't think we necessarily just mean like, what's your favorite jump scare, which like, I guess that would technically be true, but like, obviously the compare here is when the Moonlight Man suddenly appears in the room, and how that changes and shifts everything that the story's doing.
Right. I mean, I like that as a starting point because it's not a jump scare. He's been there the whole time.
Yeah.
That's what's scary, actually. You know, if he jumped in the window.
Jumping. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. if he jumped in the window, it would be less scary.
Yeah. Sorry, I stepped on your joke. You're about to make the same joke.
No, we're good. We're great minds.
All right, that's gonna be a fun one. We will read that one in a couple weeks. I think that'll be during part 4. It is impossible to figure this out. I will never get it.
Yeah, during part 4, you're right.
And that is going to do it for us this week's Gerald's Game. Will continue with chapters 14 through 24 next week. We are making our way through this novel, and then soon onto the Flanagan movie. Back with Mike. I kind of, I'm enjoying Stephen King. I am. I do miss Mike a little bit. I do.
I miss Mike. I'm looking forward to Mike. This is building up my excitement. This is honestly building up my hype for when we're going to get to that movie.
I agree.
Yep. So you can find us on all of the different socials. We're at flanaganswakepod@gmail.com, on X at flanaganswake19, on Instagram at doofmedia, on Blue Sky at flanaganswakepod. And the best place to answer the discussion question is generally going to be the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia. And the YouTube channel is also the happening place where you can watch us live. One other thing to announce this week is we have an entirely new website, doofmedia.com.
Hooray!
It was built for us by a good friend of mine, and we love it. I think it's beautiful. What I love about it is it doesn't look like every other website on the internet. It actually feels special. And I remember a time when the internet didn't all look samey same and monochrome, and I really love our website. We hope you check it out and poke around in there and let us know what you think.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Also, my favorite thing about it is it's so fast. The website before on our hosting platform was just absurdly slow for a website that just doesn't have that much content on it. Like our website is just another method of ingesting our shows that are available in like 30 other places. So it should have it should have run a lot faster than it did. And this website is lightning fast. It's so great. I love it. I'm clicking around on it right now. Look at how quickly these things load. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're really, really proud of that. It looks really good. And if you want to use the website as the place to find new episodes and find old things we did, and of course find a link to both our Patreon and our merch store, it's all there. It's really great. I love it.
Yep.
Speaking of merch store, you should go check that out because we have a whole bunch of merch for this show and for all of our shows. We are also working on some new merch, hopefully sometime in the future, that matches kind of the new Art Deco aesthetic of our new website, because we did shift the aesthetic a little bit here. We're not getting rid of our old Doof logo. We love that too much, but some different variations never hurt anyone, and I really like this aesthetic. So we're gonna try to get some merch related to that. But in the meantime, tons of Doof related merch, tons of Flanagan's Wake related merch, tons of Kingslingers related merch. It's all out there for you.
That's right. And as always, if you enjoy Flanagan's Wake or any of our other shows on the Doof network, then please head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia and support what we're doing here. We should be releasing another episode of our bonus podcast covering the TV show from any minute now.
I think by the time this episode airs, that will be out, yes. But we also say that every week because we've just lost all sense of time and dates. This is impossible.
It's true.
But of course, if you cannot afford to donate to us right now, that is absolutely okay. You can always help us out by continuing to share us. We are, I think maybe like some of our old Stephen King friends have lost us in our transition to Mike Flanagan and movies, but we're back on books for a little bit. So let them know that we're back on the books. And I think they will enjoy what we're doing here with Gerald's Game.
Very much so, yeah.
Also, you can always help us by leaving a rating and a review of our show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on anywhere that reviews are possible. This week's review comes from Steven, who says, absolutely stoked. He gives us 5 stars and said, Flanagan's work is amazing, subtle, and impactful. I love their coverage of Absentia, the only episode I've heard so far. And I not only love their takes, but also the facts about the content they're discussing. I had no idea this was a $70,000 Kickstarter movie, and that enhances my enjoyment of it. I'm stoked for them to cover the rest of his works, especially his Netflix shows. Matt, if you were scared by this one, I'm excited for you to see those. Scott, keep bringing your enthusiasm and insights. We all love them. Well, thanks, Steven. Appreciate that.
Yeah, appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, Matt, you're going to be so scared.
Great.
I can't wait. Thank you, everyone. Please keep those coming. We really do appreciate them. Even your 1-star ones. I saw you, Mr. 1-star. Thumbs down to you. All right, folks. We'll see you back here next week for more Gerald's Game. I don't know. I still don't know how to end the show. We used to have a sign off, and I don't have it anymore.
And may you have twice the number.
That feels weird.
It does. It feels wrong. I'm sorry.
We'll figure it out. Rest in peace, Mr. Flanagan.